Hey, it's Luca from EDMProd. Today we're going to be looking at Ableton basics. So if you've just got a copy of Ableton and you still got no idea what anything does, or maybe you just want a refresher of those basic fundamentals, then this is the video for you. By the end of this video, you'll know how to navigate and understand where everything is in Ableton, and you'll also have the tools to start creating your own loops as well. If you're looking for more of a guided step-by-step approach to learning music production, then check out our EDM Foundations course. That is the one for you. Alright, so this is what Ableton will look like when you pull it up. Something similar to this at least. I've changed a few colors in mine, bear in mind. But the first things first, we should navigate over to the top here and click on this little live button. Go to your preferences and just make sure that your audio is routed so you can actually hear what is happening. So let's say you've got a Scarlett 2i2, just make sure you want to select that in your audio output and also your audio input. I'm just going to keep mine as they are. Next thing to note is that at the top here where it says file, this is a really important one as well. So we can start a new live set, we can open live sets, we can save, and we can export. So these are really important functions that you will use a lot. The rest of these, you'll sort of become familiar with these functions and the shortcuts of using them. The only thing to take in mind in here is this help function. So if you hear me say anything throughout the video that you don't quite understand what it does, then feel free to just search it up here and see where it is. So let's say I say duplicate, you can search that up here and it will show you exactly where it is and the shortcut to it as well. Great, so what are we looking at? Well, this is called the session view in Ableton, and you can see that there's these vertical columns in the middle. I can click on these and they highlight. This kind of represents what you'd expect from seeing like an analog mixing desk or a hardware console. You've got these vertical channel strips. This is sort of like a mixer view in Ableton, but also it's its own unique feature. We're not going to be diving in too much of what this is right now, but just take into account that it's here and that all the tracks are represented vertically. And you can see over here, these little vertical lines are highlighted representing that we are in session view. But if I go over to here, these horizontal lines, then now we're in the arrangement view and we're going to be diving in and starting our producing journey in this arrangement view. Makes it a bit more visual. First thing I want to take your attention to is this little box down the bottom left here. It's called the info view. If you can't see it, just hit the question mark key. That's the hotkey, but you can also just hit this little arrow here. And the info view tells you information on anything that you hover your mouse over, which is really nice. So if I don't know what something is, let's say over here on the track, it says the track name and it tells you a bit about that. Over here is the play button and it tells you some shortcuts and what you can do to play in different ways. So this will be your best friend when you're learning the DAW. It makes the process a whole bunch easier. So you can see this little thing is highlighted and wherever I click, this thing highlights on the grid line that is closest to where I've clicked. So this thing is called the insert marker. We can also click and drag and that will create like a highlighted section, and I can highlight beyond multiple tracks here, and I can click on multiple tracks, and you can see as well when I click on a track it highlights the whole section. So we have 4 tracks here right now and each track behaves separately to each other. And this is how music is made. So we start to build up elements on each track. Let's say I want to put a big kick drum here and a bass line here and a synth here, and we start to layer these elements up and build a loop which we then turn into a track later. The next thing I'm going to introduce here is how to navigate around the arrangement view. So if I want to, let's say, zoom into this section right here. Well, if I move my mouse up and let's follow my mouse, then you can see that it turns into a little speaker icon. If I keep going up, then it turns into a magnifying glass. If I keep going up after this, it goes a little double arrow and then back to a magnifying glass. Well, I want to go down and click the magnifying glass around where the numbers are, and this will help me to zoom in and out. So if I click, you can see there's this black line here. Well, and if I drag down, it'll start to zoom in towards that black line. And if I drag up, it'll zoom out towards away from that black line. And then if I drag left and right, you can see that it scrolls to the left and right. And this is my favorite navigation mechanism on any DAW that I've tried. I love Ableton's navigation because it's so easy to just click and drag and move around And keep in mind where you click along the top here, which is called the beat time ruler, it's going to drag into, or it's going to zoom into that point. So if I want to zoom into where this highlighted region, I click above that highlighted region here and then sort of drag down. Maybe I can move it over as well. So on the topic of the beat time ruler at the top, you can see all these numbers, right? These numbers represent bars. And if you zoom in, you keep zooming in, you can see these numbers start to appear. There's more of them now. So each number is 1 bar. And if I zoom in even further, you can see the bars, they get divided into 4. So there's 4 beats per bar and there's 1 number per bar as well. Bars are like our standard unit of how we measure music. Everything is measured in bars and beats. So taking this into consideration and just making sure that you can see all these bars up here, that makes it easier to not get lost and be too far zoomed in or too far zoomed out. You can see that, okay, I've got these bars at the top. I've also down the bottom here got a time ruler. This shows you how long this segment is in terms of time. So this is 40 seconds long because we have this little 40 here. If I zoom out, you can see that this is 2 minutes long here. Okay, so this is all well and good. Now we know how to zoom, we understand how to highlight and click, and we can click on each track. We understand that all these tracks are behaving independently of each other. We can zoom, we know what our beats and our bars are, and we're not getting lost because we know we have the time ruler down the bottom here as well. So the next thing is understanding the transport functions, which is play, stop, and record. Well, I don't actually use these transport functions up here. They're a little bit superfluous. What I'm going to do is actually just use my spacebar instead. So when I hit space, it plays from where I've placed my insert marker. So let's say I want to play here, a space, and I hit space again, and it stops. I hit space again, and it plays back from the insert marker again. So I can play and stop, and this is how we sort of play sections in Ableton. I can click here and play, and then click here and listen to this section, and listen to this section. Of course, there's no music going on right now, but it will become relevant very soon. The next one is record, and I do use this button up here, so just keep that in mind. This record button up here is the one that you'll be pressing most of the time. The last thing to take our attention to before we start making some tunes is this number up here. This is 120. This is the tempo or the speed of our track. It's represented in beats per minute. And I can click and drag down to make it slower. And you can see that time ruler there is changing as I'm doing this as well. I can also drag up to make it quicker. And finally, if it's highlighted like it is now, it's like in a gray color, then I can type in 128 and hit enter and type in my number there. I can also hit this tap button if I want to tap my tempo in. But I'm going to go back to 128. And lastly, this little button here is our metronome. And you'll notice that it highlights yellow when I click it. That is a pretty common recurring theme in Ableton. When you click stuff, it highlights yellow. And when you click it again, it's not yellow. And that means it's off. So yellow usually means on. And for the lack of a better word, not yellow means off. So once I click this and I hit spacebar, now you can hear the metronome going. So the next part is this box here. This is an important box that we use all the time, where all of our sounds come from, where all of our instruments come from, where all of our big kicks and heavy bass lines all come from. This is the browser section. So we have a few categories in here. They're kind of self-explanatory. I'm going to briefly describe each one. Over the course of the video, you'll start to become familiar with which ones you want to use. So first of all, the most important ones are the drums, the instruments, the audio effects, and maybe the samples as well. The plugins is where we'll have our third-party plugins that you'll install. Maybe you won't have any right now, but that's okay because there's some great stuff included in the Ableton Suite package. So drums, this is where all of our drum kits lie. We're going to talk about drum kits and how you can use them, but you can click on them and audition them so you can listen to how they sound like. We've also got drum hits at the top. And if I click this little arrow, it'll show me that there's a whole bunch more drum hits and different categories which I can use as well, which this is good because maybe you just want one hi-hat. Well, you can go to the hi-hat section of this drum hits and then just choose one sample. rather than having a full drum kit. So we've got all of our one-shot samples in here, which is just going to play once you trigger them, and then they're going to stop. And we'll have all our full drum kits down here as well. Next is our instruments. This is things like synthesizers and samplers. They generate sounds in the DAW. We've got our audio effects here, which are used for processing things like reverb and delay. So this tab is our samples. We have a whole bunch of samples here, which is just a great use to just click in here, and maybe you want to click at the top here in the search bar and just look for, again, a hi-hat. Oop, if I spelt it correctly. And then now you've got all your hi-hat samples, and you can just search through and grab a hi-hat for use. So yes, like I just said, this top bar at the top is the search bar, and this is very, very useful. You'll be using this all the time. Just click up here or hit Command or Control F, and then just search in the thing that you're looking for and it'll come up. Our places down here, this will start to become more populated as you get more packs, but pretty much any folder that you want to add to this little bar, you just click this little button, add folder, and it will pop up. You can just navigate it and click it in here, and now this is where all my third party, the samples that I've downloaded or purchased come from. So I just put them in the sample folder, and Ableton just knows where to look and it can find them easily. Great, so let's pull in some audio and start chopping it up and making a loop. Okay, so I've gone through my samples and I've found this drum loop here. Sounds like this. And something you could search up to find something like this. It's just like drum loop or hip hop or breakbeat or something like this. Try and use these kind of functions if you want to find something like this. And I'm just going to drag it into this empty space here. So you can see that it's made a track for me, and it's colored it as well. So let's start looking at how we can manipulate audio. Well, I'm just going to zoom in here, and I can also drag from the corner of this track, and it'll make it a bit larger so I can see it nicely. So what Ableton has done here is, if I look at the top left, 113.36, that's my tempo. This was automatically set by Ableton because there was nothing else in my project, and I've dragged this in and it's gone, okay, you probably want to be in the same tempo as this, so I'm going to adjust your tempo for you. I'm actually going to change this to just 113 and hit enter. And let's have a look at the different functions we can use to manipulate audio. So audio is really nice because it's visual. You can see everything in front of you. I can see these peaks. I know there's going to be a peak here. It's going to have some sort of hit there and then another one there. And it's nice, and it's all happening right in front of you. There's no guesswork. So the first thing I'm going to do is highlight a section. Well, once I highlight a section, if I scroll to the top to where this title is, you can see my mouse turns into like a hand icon. Well, now I can drag this section around. So let's say I drag it there, and now it's moved to there. Well, that's great, but now I've got a big gap here. So what I can do is one of many things. Well, I can click this and I can hit Command C, just like the regular copy function. And I can click over here and hit Command V to paste it. And now we have this loop, which is like chopped up. So we can drag little sections of audio around. We can also click the ends. If I go to the top left corner of this audio box, you can see my mouse turns into this little bracket icon. And that just means I can change the start and end point of this. So the start point is there. Maybe I want to shorten it, or maybe I want to shorten the end, same way. I can do that. So if I wanted to go back to the original audio clip I had, I could just click this and just drag out from the edge, and that's what it looks like, right? I'm going to hit Command Control Z to undo that. So this is the section that I pasted. If I was to go like this, it would go back to where it originally was before I copy and pasted that. What I actually want to do now is to loop this section so it continually plays in a cycle. I'm just going to zoom out, and you see this little thing at the top bar here? That's our loop bracket, or our loop brace. So if I grab the edge of this and drag it in, and grab the end of this and drag this here, then now it's going to be looping, right? Well, not quite. To activate it, I actually have to right click on it and hit the loop button. I can also highlight a section and hit Command L, and that will loop that section no matter where it is. So if I highlight here, then it's going to put the loop brace around it and loop it. So now when I play, it's going to keep playing. So what I actually want to do is make this a little bit more consistent, and I'm going to grab this, and if I hold Option or on Mac or the relevant key on Windows, if I hold and drag, you can see there's a little file icon with a plus, and that means it's going to duplicate this section or copy it over into wherever I want to. So I can just like keep doing this, and it's just going to make copies of it all the time, right? So that's fun as well. Let's zoom in a little bit so it's easier to see and talk about some of the other functions within audio. Well, if I zoom in even further, you can see that there's these little things on the edge of each clip, and these are called fades. If I go to the edge of this in here, you can see there's a little fading in here. So if I click and drag this, this will fade the audio in slowly over time rather than just a smooth cut. If I go to the end of the clip, there's the same thing. I can click and drag this little fade icon here, and that's going to smoothly fade out. So when we have two clips that are touching each other, what happens is a crossfade automatically occurs. This is Ableton smoothly transitioning between the two clips. To create this, all I need to do is grab the fade from the right-hand side clip and drag it over to the left and keep dragging, and it will create a crossfade. So other things we can do in audio is highlight a section and delete, and that's pretty nice. I can also highlight a section and click R, and that's going to reverse that section, which is pretty cool too. And there's a few other functions that I can change when I double click the clip. This pulls up what is called the clip view. I can resize this clip view here, and I can change between the clip view and the device view down here. I've got a few functions in here that are worth taking note of. If I want to transpose or pitch the sample up and down, there's the knob here that I can use to do that. If I want to change the gain or the volume of each specific slice, I can do that here. By the way, if you want anything to reset to its default value, all you need to do is double click and it will go back to 0. There's warp functions in here. So what warping does is I can stretch the audio. Let's just copy this over here. And if I hold Shift and hover my mouse icon over the edge of this clip, holding Shift, it actually stretches rather than just revealing the rest of the clip. It stretches it out. And this is only possible if I have warp turned on. I've got my different warp modes here, which I'm not going to go into. And I can also loop. It's not going to loop the section that you have here. It's actually going to loop when you get to the end of this audio clip here as well. So just like the top here as well, where we can zoom in, we can do the same thing here. Whenever you see these numbers and this magnifying glass, you can zoom in and drag around. So you can see this is the whole clip, and I've just trimmed this little section off it. So let's say I have this and I want to extend it out. Well, if I click and drag and highlight this whole section, I can right click and there's a whole bunch of functions. I can cut and copy and paste. These are things that we've done already. I can duplicate. If I hit this, that duplicates the event. And I can also use Command D to duplicate and Command Z to undo. Let's see what other things that we can do. Well, this is a really useful function. It's called Consolidate, and the shortcut is Command or Control J. If I hit this, what's going to happen is it's going to turn all of these separate clips into one clip. And this is really, really useful. So let's say I'm happy with this little loop that I have right now. I'm going to consolidate it. And now what I can do is hover over down here where it says loop, click that, and then just drag from the edge. And that's just going to continue looping this. So now I've got this endless loop here, which is really handy. So again, just take note that there's this matrix here. If I drag in the bottom portion of this audio clip, then it's going to highlight the clip. If I drag in the top portion, you can see the mouse icon turns into the hand, and I can drag it around. So bottom for highlighting things like deleting and copying and pasting, and the top for moving around. And so I can highlight this section, then move it around by using the bottom and top sections of the audio clip. All right, so I'm just going to quickly touch on the mixer over here, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what are called MIDI tracks. So over here in the mixer section, you can see there's this yellow button, and remember yellow means on. So if I'm to play this, and if I'm to hit this yellow button, it's going to turn it off. You can see the audio is still there, but it's not coming through. There's also this little number here that's at -6, or it might be at 0 for you. This is the volume of each track separate. So I can bring down the volume and also bring it up. Over here, this C stands for center, and this is the panning. So if I drag this down, it goes to the left, and up goes to the right. Again, double clicking will bring it back to its default position. We also have this solo button here, this S. And when this is blue, this means that this track is the only one that you can hear. No matter how many other tracks there are, this will be the only one. What you can do is hold Command or Control and click other solo buttons as well. And that means that these couple tracks that you've soloed are the only ones that you can hear. And then once you click off that, then you can hear everything again. So muting and soloing is different but similar, and it's good to wrap your head around both concepts. So I can also click on tracks and hit the delete button, and that will remove them. I can right click on tracks and hit the rename button and rename it something a bit more useful. When I right click on tracks, I can also color them to what I like. And if I've colored the track, then I can go down here and click assign track color to clips, and that's going to color the clip as well. I can also drag to reposition tracks. So let's say I want to drag this at the top here. And so I have the drums at the top. I think that makes a little bit more sense for me. And let's use one of these MIDI tracks to create a bass line. So to use MIDI tracks, we need instruments. So let's go to the instruments section in our browser and select some sort of bass preset that we can use to create this bass line. So each instrument has a little arrow next to it, and you can click this arrow and it will show you a whole bunch of different presets. So operator is a nice synthesizer. I'm going to click this one and go into the bass section and have a look for something that says sub. And in fact, I can just go into this search bar and just type in sub. And I think this one, sub sine bass, looks good. Remember, you can also audition them. So a MIDI track in essence is different to an audio track because we don't have this visual audio file. In fact, there's no audio that's been created already. We trigger things like instruments, things that create audio with notes. So if I'm to highlight a section of my arrangement, I'm going to just highlight a 1-bar section. You can right click it and go insert empty MIDI clip. And now this piano roll pops up, and the piano roll is how we input notes. In this grid here, if I double click anywhere, it's going to put a note in, and if I double click again, it'll delete it. If I double click and move to the edge of the note, I can drag it to make it longer. I can also click and drag around the middle of it to move positions, and I can again hold Option to duplicate notes around. And I can highlight multiple notes and delete them. If I hit B, this pulls up our pencil tool and we can sort of click around to make notes. I can highlight them again and delete all of them if I want to. And a few other functions over here, which I'm going to go over right now. So I've got this bass patch loaded up. It sounds like this. And what I'm going to do is input a few notes that go along with this drum pattern. Okay, so let's click over to this track and just make sure that you've double clicked this or dragged it onto your track like this, and it will show up here. So when I click on this track, you can see this sub sine bass patch is here. Don't worry about all these knobs, they'll become familiar soon. Just to make sure that I'm on the right track, if I click over here, you can see it disappears. I click back here and it's there. So once it's here, you can start putting in MIDI notes onto the timeline and it'll start to trigger that synth. So there's this little headphone icon here, and if you click that, it'll highlight blue, and you can click these notes along the piano roll and see what it sounds like. So I want something a bit lower. I'm going to scroll down. I think that's a good one. So I'm going to start on C1 and I'm going to click halfway between 1 and 1.2 and see how that goes. I'm going to maybe extend this out a little bit as well. So this would be a good time to introduce the grid as well and the different grid settings that we can choose. So if I right click on the grid, you can see here it says adaptive grid and fixed grid. So right now we're in the fixed grid, 16th notes. Let's choose the 8th note fixed grid and go from there. So now I can just sort of click around and see how that goes too. So I want one a little bit lower here that's going to be a bit longer as well. So I can double click there and sort of drag down until I hear the note that I want, and then just extend this out, and let's see how this goes. Maybe I'm going to drag the start point here and let's see how this sounds. Okay, so that sounds good. I'm just going to click from the edge of this clip here and drag out, and that's just going to automatically loop this clip like we have with the audio clip as well. Just make sure this loop button is selected. And these are the main two differences between audio and MIDI. So the MIDI is triggering something which is generating the audio, and you can see that audio is here being generated. And this is pre-rendered, pre-recorded, we can see it visually, and it can be manipulated. So the next thing, I'm just going to double click on this MIDI clip again and hit this button. It says duplicate here. And what that does is it actually duplicates the length of this MIDI clip. So it was 1 bar before, and now it's 2 bars. You can see there's a 1 and a 2 representing each bar. This is great because I can make slight variations which make the loop a little bit more interesting. So let's say I wanted to add a note in here. This note sounds good to me, and then I'm just going to shorten this bit, and so they don't overlap with each other. So now we can see there's a slight variation in the second bar compared to the first. I'm actually going to duplicate the loop one more time, and now the loop is 4 bars long, and we can make a slight different variation over here, and maybe just bring it back to where it was in fact. So now the bass line is going through and making a slight change in the middle. So now with the loop going, I really recommend you to experiment with whatever you want to do. If you want to add new audio or MIDI tracks, you can right click here and hit insert audio track or hit Command T. And the same with the MIDI track, you can insert a MIDI track here or hit Shift Command T. And you can just use these audio and MIDI tracks to keep layering sounds on top. So to give you another example, I'm going to delete this loop that we have here and start layering a few sounds together to make like a house rhythm. So I'm going to go into the search bar up here. Maybe I'm going to go to samples here and type in kick. And so this kick sounds nice. I can just grab and drag this onto the track that I want. So that's well and good. I might just bring down the volume of it a little bit. If I want more than one kick, I can highlight this section and hit Command D, or right click on the timeline and do duplicate here. And then I can highlight this whole section and hit Command D again, or I can hold Command D and it's going to keep duplicating, which is a really nice feature. So now I've got a kick drum on each beat. I'm actually going to mute this one at the top here, and let's have a listen to these. Right, so it's a little bit slow because now we're making house, remember, so I'm going to bring the tempo at the top here to 128 and hit enter. That's a bit better. So the next thing we need for house is a clap. So I'm just going to search in clap and find something like a 909 clap is great. And I'm just going to click and drag onto our timeline, and then again we're getting a little bit quicker now. What I can do is just shorten this tail because the long tail is a little bit annoying. I don't want all that empty clip there. I'm just going to shorten that and then just highlight from the first bar until the third kick drum, and then just hit duplicate. And what this is going to do is going to duplicate the clap onto every second kick drum, which is what we want for that house fundamental foundation. And with house, we have our open hat. I'm going to insert a new audio track and drag an open hat. Let's just search for that. Great, that sounds good. and the open hat is between each kick drum. So we can go like this and hold Option this time just to do it a different way and just place one between each kick drum. So now I've got my 4 hats in there. I don't really want to have to drag each time, so I'm just going to select from the first to the second bar and then hit Command D a few times. I'm just going to duplicate that over, and great, now we have the foundation of a house track. I'm going to grab this sub sign from the top and drag it down, and then let's just change the notes around so it sort of fits this house vibe now, because we were doing hip hop before. Now let's do a little bit of house. So maybe let's just touch up some notes here. I'm going to copy this one here and let's see how that sounds, and maybe delete all of these ones. Oops. And you can also, when it comes to the piano roll, if I just highlight a section of the piano roll, you see these little markers, highlight everything in there, and then I can just hit Command D. I'm just going to duplicate that as well. And I think it's a little bit loud, so I'm going to turn it down at the mixer here. Great, so far so good. Once you get to this stage, I really recommend, again, experimenting. So right now I'm going to look at my first note here. I know from my first note here that I'm in the key of C. So all I need to do is go into my samples again, and I'm just going to type in, let's say, chord C. Some sort of C minor chord perhaps. Great, so maybe we can just drag this one in and see how this goes. So I've noticed it actually sounds a little bit weird, and this is because Ableton automatically warps all of the sounds to try and get them in tempo with your track when you bring them in. All I'm going to do in this case is double click this clip and go over to where it says warp and just unclick the warp button, and it's going to make it sound a little bit less digital sounding. Finally, using loops when you're just starting is a great way to learn the foundations of how rhythm and groove works. So I'm going to show you an example, and I'm actually going to click here this time and hit Command T, and that's going to insert an audio track between these two here. And I'm going to go over to my samples and look for percussion, and maybe a percussion loop. So this one is a Samba percussion, it's in 100 BPM, but if I drag it in, you can see that it automatically warps to my track. And if I hit play, let's have a listen. So you can sort of experiment with using different like percussion loops and sort of just drag them in and have a look. That's pretty cool. Remember all of our audio editing functions. So I can delete this section because it's past the end of the loop. Let's say I want to delete this section as well, start tidying things up. And I can go in here and I can solo this one. And I can drag little clips around. So maybe I want to drag this here instead, and I want to delete this one. And let's say I want to drag this one over here, and I'm just doing this more or less randomly, and let's just have a listen and see how this goes. Remember, I have to unclick the solo button if I want to hear all of them together. So I think I'm going to delete this little end section and maybe sort of put this thing here instead. And this is just a really fun way to get you started. Just use a few different percussion loops. We need some sort of bass line and some sort of synth or chord or piano or melodic elements. So now we can just start experimenting, and I really urge you to experiment and see what you come up with. So the final thing that I'm quickly going to touch on is using these drum racks that we talked about here. If I go into the drums section, Well, we can use these drum racks or these drum kits in our tracks and program what we want from them. So let's say I'm going to use this one called the 909 core kit. This is a really classic kit for house, and I'm just going to drag it onto an empty section of the timeline, and it will make a MIDI track for me. So this is MIDI, and we're going to be programming in the drums. So if I highlight a section and right click and make a new MIDI clip, then you can see on the piano roll, there's actually a whole bunch of different percussion instruments that are all labeled. So we have a bass drum and our rim shot and our snare drum. We can sort of just listen to what they sound like. And we can start using this to layer on top of what we already have as well. So let's have a little go here. I'm just going to mute this percussion track here as well. So maybe I'm gonna get some closed hats this time and sort of just place 3 here and then just duplicate them across. I'm actually going to duplicate this loop because I want it to go twice as long, and then I'm just going to make this repeating every 2 bars. And maybe even I can put a ride in there, and I'm just hitting Command D to duplicate them across every beat. So I've got all these things going now. If I want to change the volume of each sound, I can click on the thing that I want to change. So this ride is a little bit loud. I can click on it and then just bring the level down. So these closed hats, maybe I want to bring them down. I'm gonna reduce the decay of them. That'll just make them a little bit snappier. Maybe I want to bring the crash level down as well. Now I can add my percussion back in and see how that goes. So feel free to experiment with all of these things. Use the kits in here, and you can drag on different kits as well once you've already established your things in here. And see how they change completely, drastically from kit to kit. They sound different each time. You can just experiment with using different samples as well in audio tracks, and using instrument presets to generate things like bass lines and melodies, chopping up loops in audio, and just continue to layer these loops until you have something that you like. This is how we become familiar with the program and its users. I'm just going to touch quickly on these audio effects. These audio effects can be dragged onto any tracks along here, not just the audio tracks. They can also be dragged onto the MIDI tracks. They process and change how the tracks sound. So I can add things like reverb. All I need to do is just drag them onto the track that I want. So I can drag them onto each track if I want. And let's say I drag it onto this one. Now you can see that this piano chord has a whole bunch of reverb on it. So processing is for another day, but just know that you can use these audio effects. There's a whole bunch of presets in here which I recommend exploring, but you can just drag them onto any track that you want and start processing and changing the audio material. So let's say that you've got something that you like and you want to export it. So let's say I want to export this section. All I need to do is go up here to File. I can also save it here, and remember we have export here. You can just leave the settings as they are, hit export, choose where you want it to save, and it will export that project into an audio file for you. So that's it for today. I hope this has helped you grasp the fundamentals of how we navigate and use Ableton, and how we can set up different audio and MIDI tracks and start experimenting and building loops of our own and just having a little bit of fun with it. If you enjoyed the video today, remember to leave a like or subscribe to the channel. I'll be making more stuff in the future. So until then, thanks for hanging out and I'll see you next time.